lecture has received a bad rap over the last 20 years or so. And, honestly, for some very fair reasons, right? It has certainly been something that has probably been relied on a little bit too much in higher education for a long time. And through research, we now know that there are alternative teaching methods that can lead to better learning for our students. However, there is no need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and completely give up on lecturing. Lecturing absolutely has a lot of value. So our goal for today during the session is to re-envision what lecture could and should look like in order to retain its inherent value while subverting and overcoming some of its negative attributes. So as we get started, I would like us to start by considering this question. Why do we lecture? So my colleagues have put this link in the chat. There's also a QR code here for you if you want to do it on your phone or your tablet. This will take you to a shared document, and I have created some columns here for you. I'd love for you to pick one of the columns under the green question 1 that says, why do we lecture? And add some reasons of your own to answer that question. So what are some of the good things about lecture? Or why do we do it? Why do we choose to do it, right? We're going to take a minute to do that. And then we will talk about it, and then we will address question 2. Hey, seeing some good stuff in the chat here to disseminate information, introduce socialized topics. It's a standard way of receiving information. Absolutely. It's something that a lot of us do, and it's something that everybody's used to, right? Can efficiently deliver large amounts of content. Absolutely. Fit traditional expectations. Yep. Let's see. There we go. Help students get interested in a topic. Yes. Reach a large number of students. Yeah, it's something that we definitely see a lot in large sections, right? It's a little bit easier to do in there. Yeah, to teach new things, to offer structure to how we present information. Absolutely. So you all are touching on already, really a lot of the primary reasons that we see a lot of lecture, right? So let's take a look at them. So first off, kind of the main thing that I think a lot of you really hit on here is that we lecture to relay key concepts, right? Principles, ideas. Sometimes we just need to lecture to convey that important content to our students. Lectures are straightforward. They allow us to, quote unquote, transfer information very directly to our students as the sole source of information, helps us avoid confusion, helps us identify for our students those points that matter the most, and de-emphasize things that are less important, right? And then next, as someone already said in the chat, it really allows us to cover more material quickly and efficiently, right? That efficiency piece, I think, is really important to a lot of people. When instructors are doing all of the talking and are well practiced, lectures can be presented very quickly. They can be planned ahead of time. There's that structure piece, right, to fit into a particular schedule. And as such, we can kind of, quote unquote, cover more material, right? We can get through a lot. Something that nobody has said yet, but that is really a key underpinning of lecture, I think, is they really offer us a lot of control and order in the classroom, right? They allow us to retain control over what's happening. Again, particularly in those larger classes, where it can be sometimes more challenging to facilitate other kinds of activities or learning strategies, right? Just because of the sheer size of the class. Um, Quite frankly, they are easily recycled, reused, and recorded. For those of us who teach the same course semester after semester, which, that's very common, um, it's very easy to reuse an already prepared lecture, right? Likewise, for those of us who might want to make that information available later, right, or in an online format, lectures are easily captured via recording, and students can get essentially the same experience that they would have received if they had attended the lecture in person, right? So we can kind of imitate that in a different form, make it available in a different way. And quite frankly, that's how we were taught, right? That's kind of what everyone else does. A lot of us teach the way that we were taught. It's very common. As somebody said here, it's a standard way of receiving and delivering information. Students themselves are certainly very comfortable with the kind of passive role that comes with a lecture in the classroom. That makes it very familiar and comfortable, not only to us, but also to them. Um, and if we found success this way ourselves as students, right? It makes sense that some of us might think, well, I learned this way. My students should too, right? Worked for me. Why not work for them? And then similarly, something that I think is really important, we might be trying to maintain a certain departmental culture or cultural norms of our given discipline, right? Like, this is what we do in our department, this is what's expected. And last but not least, our students might be expecting it, right? They go to college, they sit in the classroom, they listen to lectures. Not unusual at all for students to think that's what's going to happen. As I already said, they're certainly very comfortable with that passive role of listening to a lecture. Sometimes they can be more resistant to being asked to do something else during class time, right? They just want to come and sit down and listen and be done with it. But students also really appreciate a class that's more engaging, and hopefully they want to learn effectively. So that leads us to question number 2 on that Google Doc, which is, what are the cons of lecture? So what doesn't work about lecture? So please go back to that Google Doc using the same link, go to that second column in red and add some of your ideas there, and we will talk about those again. Yeah, so we see some great things already showing up here. Not as effective for adult learners. Uh, Definitely a lack of engagement. There's passivity inherent in that structure. Doesn't provide opportunities for kind of hands-on learning or student-led work. Yeah, this is a good one. Students may be daydreaming. They may not be listening at all. That's a problem because they're not engaged, right? Yeah, for the instructor, it's exhausting. Students might zone out. They might miss that crucial information. And, it could be super boring. And often it is, right? Yeah, and students sometimes do not want to take notes, unfortunately. That makes me really sad. It's really kind of a lost art, the art of note taking. And FYI, I can geek out over note taking. So, and if you ever want to talk about that with me, just shoot me an email, and we can geek out about it together. So yeah, a lot of again, you're already touching on a lot of the kind of important things that we need to be aware of when it comes to lecturing. So, there's a long list of things that are not great about lecture. So, first, what a lot of you have already said here, they're often long, and perhaps more importantly, they can be boring, right? I imagine that most of us in here today would likely agree that the human attention span can be easily disrupted. And listening to and absorbing a kind of a high level lecture is a task that really requires sustained, focused attention. Research estimates that the average student attention span can last as little as a few minutes, with maximum levels of concentration typically happening at around the 10 or 15-minute mark after the start of a lecture. And most lectures are often longer than 15 minutes, right? And I bet many of us would argue that the attention span might be decreasing these days, thanks to our good friend TikTok, perhaps. We want to watch a 10-second video and be done with it. So I think something to realize here is that attention span is not necessarily at the core of the problem here. If you think about it, all of us, and our students included, right? We can sit through movies that we like. We can binge Netflix shows for hours, right? Or YouTube videos, or play video games for hours on end. Especially charismatic speakers can really capture our attention for a long time. So the bigger problem then is the nature of the lecture itself. It's boring, it's unengaging, it's monotonous. That's why we're here today, right? Something else to keep in mind is that lectures are often typically teacher-centered, right? They often adopt that kind of sage on the stage model of teaching, a solo performance of the instructor, demonstrating little back and forth with students. So they might not bring students into the conversation to ask questions or have debates over ideas, share experiences, and then they can be built only around the teacher's agenda with no way to tell whether students are actually learning, right? Lectures also don't really accommodate individual student needs very well. And that's true for any single teaching modality, which we need to remember. But in terms of lectures, think about students who might have auditory processing difficulties or have other learning needs. They might be completely left out of this learning experience, or be challenged by it. So that's something that we need to consider for sure. And then, as many of you mentioned in our Google Doc, for all of these reasons, lecture, when done poorly, is less effective for fostering deep or long-term learning. Research shows us that attention to and retention of lecture material declines as a function of time on task. So the longer that lecture goes on, the less students are getting from it. And that loss of attention is correlated with significant performance costs, right? And also, there's only so much information that our students can take in without any opportunity to process it in the moment. And so again, ultimately, that's why we're all here today. We want to improve our students' learning, and we want to know how to do that while we're lecturing. So now we're going to shift gears and focus on some evidence-based pillars that can help us make lectures more dynamic. So not only more engaging and interesting for our students, which is a good thing all by itself, but also more effective in terms of reaching our educational objectives for them. So here are the things that we're going to be talking about during this session. And we're going to take each of these one by one, but here's a preview of what's coming, okay? So, and don't worry, like I said, we're going to approach each of these one by one. So don't feel like you have to start furiously scribbling everything down. So let's start with activating prior knowledge. So one of the primary challenges in learning is moving information from short-term working memory to long-term memory. And it's much easier to learn and integrate new information that is related to content we already know. That's because we don't have to build brand new neural pathways. This is why experts typically learn faster than novices, right? And this can assist in overall comprehension of information because the information then is processed and stored more effectively because it's being connected to those neural pathways that already exist. So as the expert in the subject matter, you as the instructor need to play a key role in helping students identify what information might be helpful in learning the new information. So let's see how this might work. This is a brief synopsis of a movie, a well-known movie. So I'd like you to take a minute, read through this summary, and see if you can determine which movie it is. I'm going to let you read it, and if you have any ideas, feel free to put them in the chat. And if you don't, that's fine. So we have a seasoned cattleman engages in a jealous feud with an arrogant rocketeer who is new to the area. The rocketeer's accidental defenestration finds the cattleman accused of attempted murder by friends and colleagues, including a winsome livestock caretaker. Along with a local alien, they become trapped in the lair of a neighboring sociopath and ultimately establish a truce in order to escape their captor's clutches. Any guesses? Okay, so now I'm going to give you some additional information that might activate your prior knowledge. The movie is animated. And Coy guessed it right. It's Toy Story. So was it easier for you to figure out what the movie was after I told you that it was animated? Hopefully so. I also just want you to know that I'm very proud of my use of the word defenestration in this, which means falling out of a window, if you didn't know. So now you know. So that's an example of how knowing something important, that prior knowledge, which is that this is an animated movie, makes it easier to kind of assimilate new information, okay? So a few easy strategies to incorporate in your lectures to help activate or tap into your students' prior knowledge. Implementing quick quizzes or polls at the start of a lecture, especially on new material, and not necessarily graded quizzes either. It can just be maybe a few questions you ask them that aren't graded. Pre-tests like this, even if students can't answer all of the questions, can help give students cues regarding what the upcoming material will be about. That then allows them to start retrieving any previously stored information so that it's already accessible to them when you start introducing new concepts in the lecture. And that also gives you some insights into what they already know or don't know. Partner reviews can be another version of kind of the tried and true think, pair, share, or the turn and talk, in which you can ask students to chat with a peer partner for a minute or two about what he or she already knows about the upcoming lecture content. They can share personal experiences, examples, summaries, etc. So kind of a similar example, but on a larger scale, would be a group brainstorm or background knowledge probes with the entire class, right? You can say, tell me what you know about this. That can kind of help them dust off the cobwebs and help you find out what students already know about the subject. That's what we did at the beginning of this webinar when we did the why do we lecture? What are some of the cons of lecturing? So that was helping you kind of integrate some prior knowledge and helping me know what you already know about it. Okay. So next, make explicit connections for them, right? Between the new material and the old material that they're already familiar with. Those connections might be familiar to you or seem obvious to you, but they may not be as obvious to your novice students. So that could be as simple as saying something like, okay, remember last week when we talked about this? Okay, that's going to be important as we learn this new topic today. It can be as simple as that. Lastly, previewing the readings or previewing what the lecture is going to be about in the next class can help students not only comprehend better any assignment you want them to complete prior to a lecture, but then consequently help them better understand the lecture that follows, because again, you're kind of priming the pump for them. Highlight a few important concepts for them to familiarize them with at the end of the class, and that can help set them up for success in the next class that's coming up. Okay. So next, capturing attention, part 1. So we've already talked a little bit about this in terms of the importance of attention in retaining information. So obviously another important component is capturing the attention in the first place. Distraction, multitasking, any general lack of attention, they all absolutely impact learning and academic performance. You know, we might want to say ban all computers in the classroom, ban cell phones in the classroom. That'll solve the problem. But that's not really a practical or honestly effective solution, right? The reality is students have been getting distracted in class since the beginning of time, since before cell phones existed, since before we had the internet and Reddit and all of those things that students like to do in class. So what can we do to garner their attention? So firstly, remember that interest leads to attention. And believe it or not, I know this is going to be a surprise to all of you. We know that our topics, things like rhetoric or weather systems or chemical structures, are all super fascinating because they're super fascinating to us. We chose these disciplines. We decided we wanted to focus our careers on them. But guess what? Our students probably don't have that same innate interest in the same things that we have. They may not be as excited about it as we are. So something that we really need to do is transparently and communicate the value of the material that they're learning about. If students can understand why it's important, why it's relevant, how it will serve them later, then their interest can begin to develop. We also know that level of difficulty impacts attention. Some of you may already know about Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, which basically says that there's this sweet spot of moderate difficulty when it comes to learning. If something is too easy, students are going to get bored. If something is too hard, students are going to shut down and give up because they don't think that they're capable, right? So to prevent both of those things from happening, it's wise to purposefully scaffold particularly difficult content. So all that means is breaking down complex topics into simpler, more accessible concepts in a meaningful order that builds on what they've learned before. So, right, there's that prior knowledge piece again. Another strategy you may have heard before is to break lecture into segments. So back to that attention piece, right? Lecture for a little while, then maybe insert a little break, a little active learning break or a pause or something like that. And this strategy can serve multiple purposes. It can facilitate that scaffolding piece by creating segments that can focus on various components of a more difficult concept. But also breaking up lecture and changing format serves to re-engage students at various points throughout the lecture and recapture their attention that may have been lost. And, you know, the bonus, if we have a little brief active learning break, again, even if it's just a little like turn and talk or something, give students the opportunity to dig into and apply the material on their own, which reinforces their learning, as well as re-engages them. So we talked about active learning breaks. And something, if any of you attended my previous webinar on low stakes, low effort active learning, you might remember this suggestion as well. And that's what I usually call the pause procedure. And this is just a really simple thing, a really simple strategy that uses strategic pauses in a lecture to provide students with time, like a minute, 2 minutes tops, to review their notes for themselves, maybe discuss with a partner or a neighbor to see if they have the same concepts or if they have questions that they both have regarding the content, and then assimilate and retain the lecture material, right? So it gives them a little break to start processing things rather than just trying to hang on to what the instructor is saying. During that pause, you could also ask students to do things like summarize their notes, list key points or main ideas covered, do a quick mind map of the information. There are all kinds of things that you can do, but like I said, it can be as simple as saying, okay, we're going to pause for a minute. I want you to reread your notes and see if you have any questions about it. Again, this can take 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes tops. Is super fast. And to what somebody said in our Google Doc, this can also encourage our students to take notes and hopefully help them learn to take good notes. And it also provides you, again, with some formative assessment about how they're doing. All right, so capture attention part 2. So it's no surprise that delivery impacts attention too. Is anyone else in here old enough to remember Ferris Bueller's Day Off and recognize this person on the slide, or is it just me? Hopefully you all know who this is, right? So this is the teacher in Ferris Bueller. Thank you, Aubrey. I'm glad you do. You know, I'm actually going to talk about something like this. Yes, thank you, Karen. Bueller, anyone? Not the most engaging speaker, right? So, you know, we don't have to be game show hosts in the classroom. It still bears repeating that I think a bored student is an easily off-task student, which impacts their learning. So a few basic things we want to keep in mind here. We need to convey enthusiasm and positive energy. If we don't seem excited about or interested in our material, or if we seem negative or disinterested in teaching itself, then our students are surely not going to be excited either. And they're not going to be engaged if we're not already engaged, right? Varied tone and inflection. Again, we don't want to be Ben Stein here, the monotonous, monotone professor droning on. We don't want to be Charlie Brown's teacher with the wah, 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 wah. We don't have to be great actors or entertainers, but we can use our voice strategically to garner and maintain attention. So for instance, you know, you can think about change in how you're presenting something. So change grabs attention. So maybe talking more loudly to emphasize something, or talk a little bit more softly to draw them in, or maybe use a higher inflection that can cue your students to take notice, right? Whereas droning on, where everything just sounds the same, can cause students to struggle with determining which components are most important and also just struggle with paying attention at all. Eye contact is probably something you all already know is important, but I'm repeating it here because I have actually seen a lot of instructors who close their eyes, who look away while they're teaching, who don't look at their students at all. So making eye contact, making purposeful eye contact with your students helps you make that physical and energetic connection with them, and it draws them in. And it can help make even those large lecture halls feel a little bit more intimate. And if you have one of those large lecture halls, I also encourage you to move around a little bit. Like, can you walk up and down the aisles? That can give you some actual physical proximity to your students, especially those ones who are at the back, right? So think about eye contact, think about making that connection with your students. And don't read from the slides, y'all. Don't read from the slides. Don't rehash the readings either. These are two surefire ways to demonstrate that you and your lecture are unnecessary and uninteresting. If you're not adding anything to their understanding of the readings, if you're just telling them what they should have already read, or if you're just reading the things that they can read for themselves off the slides, why are they even there? Your students don't need to be there at all, right? So you need to be adding more than just what's on the slides, using the slides as a teleprompter, or just telling them what they should have already read. Because if you do that, guess what? They're also not going to do the reading, or they're going to do the reading and they're not going to come to class. So the two have to work together. All right. Are we doing okay? I'm taking a pause. Okay. So similar to capturing attention in general, it's also important to help your students identify important points during the lecture, especially our younger, less experienced students. So we already know that experts and novices process information differently. So we talked about that already. And research has proven that overtly directing student attention to the big picture ideas of lectures can really help our students focus and can increase their learning. So how do we do this? First, preview those big ideas at the start of the lecture. So you might identify them before you start, maybe put them on a board. In the physical classroom, you can put them on a slide. You can tell students to be on the lookout for those during class. This strategy also taps into the fact that novice learners benefit from repetition. Remember, I did this at the beginning of this webinar. I had a slide with here are all the main points we're going to be talking about. So I gave you a preview of what was to come. Those are the important points. You also want to think about using hooks or cues before those important points as they arise during the lecture. So how can you emphasize them with some sort of attention grabber? It could be something like a quick little 1-minute quiz, an interesting image on a slide, a question that you ask them, maybe a little story or a narrative that you share that emphasizes that point, maybe a really interesting statistic about the material. You can also just say, hey guys, this is an important point. Make sure you make note of this. Something as overt as that also works, right? I've even told my students things like, okay, guys, this is important. Put a star next to this in your notes. I do that all the time. So that helps students, again, pay attention, help them identify those important points, and help them retain that information. Structure is really important too, obviously. It might be tempting to just get in front of the room and start speaking off the cuff, but having some sort of organizational structure is going to be really important in helping keep your students engaged, making sure they can follow along with you and retain that information afterwards. So you could do things like provide students with advanced lecture slides, maybe some guided notes or a graphic organizer. Those can offer useful structure that will help students hone in on those important points. I mean, honestly, we're going to talk about note taking again. Think about how students typically take notes in the undergraduate classroom. They just truly write down everything that's on the slide, and they try to capture everything you say, maybe. And you know, that just is not an effective strategy, right? So these kinds of tools can help students stay focused, engaged, and help them process that information throughout the lecture. Gestures and symbols can also be valuable. They can work in the same way as those vocal cues that I talked about earlier, or those hooks. Perhaps you make a noticeable gesture when you come to an important point, right? Maybe you move to the other side of the room to emphasize it. Maybe you draw a symbol on the board, like I said, put a star next to this one. or place them on slides to alert students to particularly important content. Again, so a different kind of cue for them. And guess what? Active learning breaks. I've said it once, but I'm saying it again. Breaking your lecture up into segments is valuable for so many reasons, including highlighting important points for your students. Because when you do that, say you introduce a certain concept and then you say, okay, we're going to take 5 minutes and we're going to do this little activity or whatever it is, some sort of quick opportunity to apply that knowledge. Again, that's going to help them integrate and process that knowledge, right? And you can plan these purposefully in advance. I encourage you to plan them purposefully within your lectures. But you can also take advantage of the kind of verbal and nonverbal feedback you might be getting from your students in the moment while you're lecturing to determine if those breaks need to come earlier. So maybe you see students are looking confused. Then that might be a cue to you as the teacher that now is a time we need to stop and do something with this to help them really figure it out. So, if students are fidgeting, this is typically connected to lower levels of learning and attention, right? So some things to look out for, things to consider. All right, let's talk about media and technology for a minute. We know, I think we all probably feel that technology is both an amazing blessing, but can also be a curse when it comes to the classroom. But the fact remains that now more than ever, we have a wealth of media and a wealth of technology options available to us that we can integrate into our teaching to liven things up, right? However, there are both good ways and bad ways to use technology. So here are some basic principles that we want to keep in mind when we think about how we want to integrate technology into our classroom. First of all, keep it simple. I think one of the most common mistakes made is putting too much information on a single PowerPoint slide. As I said earlier, your slides should not function as your teleprompter. While students might think it's better to have more information on the slide, studies have actually shown that excessive content does not result in higher levels of learning. People can process images much more quickly and efficiently than a whole lot of text. And students have actually been shown to learn more when there is less information on a slide and at a higher level when extraneous sounds or disconnected images or animation were not included. So your slides and their content, their images should complement your verbal message, but not detract from it with unnecessary clutter, okay? So you don't need to, and quite frankly, you should not use all the bells and whistles that are available to you to foster learning, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Sometimes more is just more, and it's not better, okay? Similarly, don't use technology just for the sake of using technology. The media and technology that you choose to incorporate should be relevant. It should be supportive of what students are supposed to be learning or meant to be learning. So for instance, don't just show a video to fill time or because it's funny, right? Instead, only show a video that highlights or demonstrates an important concept in some way. You don't have to blow their minds with fancy technology, right? If it doesn't add to the learning process in some meaningful way. Those bullet points, they really don't need to fly in with a gunshot sound every single time, okay? That gunshot sound doesn't add anything. And if you're going to use images, please be sure to use high quality graphics to keep things legible and professional. So there's clip art that comes with PowerPoint. It's convenient, but it's not always ideal. Like it's come a long way from where it started. It's a lot better than it used to be, but it's still often not great. If you include photos, make sure they're high enough resolution so as not to appear pixelated or grainy, because that can be really distracting. Likewise, be mindful of how graphs and charts and diagrams are going to appear to your students on a slide. So sometimes putting an entire chart or an entire diagram on a slide isn't feasible in terms of readability, right? It can be really, especially if it's a particularly big or complicated one, the numbers can get really small or the text can get really small. It can make it really challenging to be able to read that. So consider making a handout instead, or breaking up that diagram into segments across various slides. Similarly, you might also consider, is it really necessary to have the entire chart or the entire diagram on there? Is there a way that it could be simplified and therefore easier for your students to process? Finally, my colleagues who are here know that this is a hot point for me. Please choose your fonts smartly. This is near and dear to my heart because just like note-taking, I absolutely geek out over fonts. I think they're super important, and I get easily offended by poorly chosen fonts. Yes, Aubrey, like Comic Sans. Y'all don't be using Comic Sans in your PowerPoints. Do not. It is universally maligned, right? Because it just looks too childlike, right? No Comic Sans. Papyrus is also often derided for being overused. If you don't know this, there is, yeah, no wingdings either. There's a hilarious Saturday Night Live sketch with Ryan Gosling in it that is all about how he is angry that the movie Avatar used papyrus for its titles. I love this sketch because it truly speaks to me. So don't use Comic Sans, don't use papyrus. Thank you, Erica. Fonts matter, like they're so important. So here's some principles to keep in mind. And Erica is a graphic design professor, so hopefully she will back me up on this. So avoid fonts that are too curly or too fancy. Those are difficult to read. Too many different fonts can be distracting, so try to stick to 2 at most. Amanda, I'm glad you like font humor. If you haven't seen the Ryan Gosling thing, like you really need to look it up. Font size should also be large and readable. Okay, so your slide fonts need to be large enough to be read from the back of the classroom. Okay, if you're not sure, test it out. Put up a slide in your classroom, go stand at the back where your students might be and see if you can read it. Okay, if you're teaching in a face-to-face class. So I usually try not to use fonts that are smaller than 24 points on a slide or below 11 points on a handout, depending on the general size of the font itself, because some fonts are bigger than others just in general. So those are some basic principles to keep in mind, and if you stick to them, I will be so happy and so proud of you. Fonts matter. All right, time for another pause. Let's take a minute, reflect on what we've discussed so far, process it a little bit, see if you have any questions for me. While you do that, I'm going to drink some of my water because I've been talking a whole lot. Yeah, Zach, I don't want to see any Joker Man. Nope. Nope. Terrible. Not okay. I will come for you. Okay, how are we doing? Any questions at this point? Or any other fonts you want to suggest? Okay. I take your silence as tacit acknowledgement that it is okay to move forward. All right. We're going to keep going. We're going to dive back in Another core principle of dynamic lecturing is adding meaning with examples. Again, this is probably something you already do, something you already know about, but it's really important. So, providing examples, helps our students build connections and assimilate new material. Again, back to that idea of activating prior knowledge. This is another way to do that. It also increases student motivation by, again, enhancing that meaning, establishing relevance of the material. It shows the concepts in action for our students. Good examples also make concepts easier to remember and thus easier to retrieve later. So there's that retrieval practice that I mentioned earlier. So, and examples are even more powerful when they're accompanied by visual components, research tells us. So things like a video, a diagram, something on a whiteboard, an image on a slide, a demonstration, things like that. So here are a few strategies to keep in mind. You might aim to provide 2 examples if possible for each big idea in the lecture. And these should be examples that your students can relate to. So several years ago, a colleague of mine who was giving a presentation to some students referenced Tom Selleck as Magnum PI. Let me tell you, the students had no idea who that was or what she was talking about because it was old and they did not know who he was. I have another friend who has had the same experience. He'll reference Wayne's World. And again, Wayne's World is old now, so they don't know what that is either. Well, yeah, Karen, it's absolutely fair to still be in love with Tom Selleck. I mean, he's Tom Selleck. He's amazing. He's gorgeous. Last semester or last fall, I made a Seinfeld reference with my own students, and then I saw the looks on their faces, and I was like, oh my God, do y'all not know Seinfeld? Oh, I'm so old. So a few of them were like, yeah, maybe I've seen some reruns. I don't know. My parents used to watch it. So yeah, those examples have to be relatable to our students or they're not going to get it, especially if they're pop culture, obviously. Also, obviously, you want to try to use real world examples or case studies if you can. Those in particular highlight the importance of the material because it helps see the course content in action. And again, it gets back to that communicating relevance piece. Again, doing things like giving demonstrations, working problems with students, telling stories, which I mentioned earlier. All of these things can serve as examples. They serve to illustrate their course content and make it more tangible and relatable for your students. And again, it also breaks up the lecture. Like we talked about, there's that scaffolding and segmenting piece, and it helps students apply their knowledge and determine an appropriate example. Oh my gosh, you are referencing one of my all-time favorite songs, Kate Bush, Running Up That Hill. Yeah, Stranger Things brought it back around, right? That helps us a little bit. But you know what? I loved it before Stranger Things. You can ask my team that. We actually had a conversation about this one day. But yeah, thank you for that. Another idea, ask your students to help you generate some examples individually, in groups, maybe in their homework. It's up to you. This takes things actually one step further by getting the students to apply their knowledge and determine an appropriate example themselves. So you're getting them to do some of the work too, right? So you're getting them engaged. It is also great practice to provide a little bit of time for reflection during your lecture. Reflection has been shown to increase cognitive engagement and thus increase student learning, understanding, and foster critical thinking skills. And again, it gives them time to process the information, to process that new information and connect it with the old information and help them with metacognition as well. And you as the instructor can also have the benefit of reviewing any of their reflection activities periodically to assess their comprehension of the material. So a lot of these things can also help you with some formative assessment, right? So what are some strategies that you think might work well in this capacity? Is there something that you do in your classroom or just something that you've heard of that you think would work or something that you want to try? So I want you to go to the chat, take 30 seconds to think of something. Type it into the chat, but don't hit enter yet. I'm going to tell you when to hit enter. And then you're all going to send it at the same time, and we're going to see them all show up, and then we can review them. So take 30 seconds, put an idea for a strategy that offers time for reflection, and I'll tell you when to hit enter. Okay, are you ready? 1, 2, 3, enter. Great. So now scroll up a little bit. Let's see what we have here. Great. Note cards for questions, summaries, thoughts on lecture. So yeah, like an exit ticket, ask a question, have a prompt that allows students to free write. That's great. Draw a symbol, ABC review chart. Nice. Mentimeter, turn and talk. Organizing key concepts, giving them a chance to ask questions, taking a break. Yes. Adding some pauses. Excellent. Work an example, compare with a neighbor. Yes, these are all so good. So here's just a few ideas that I came up with that I've used, that I know about, that again, research shows that these can be really beneficial. So, and you've already mentioned some of these things in the chat. So like a quick write, a 1-minute paper, an exam wrapper. So something that you have them complete after an exam or an activity that asks them to reflect on how they did or what they did well. Again, the pause procedure, which we talked about and you mentioned in the chat. Things like a write pass, the turn and talk, or a think, pair, share, journaling. Some back channel dialogue can also be really interesting, I think, for that. Using a Teams channel or Skeet post or in Blue Sky or X posts, right? Blogs, wikis, etc. So any way that you can give them a little bit of time to actually reflect on their learning can definitely help them kind of process that material and engage them cognitively. Okay, incorporating retrieval practice will not only keep your students engaged, but also capitalize on the testing effect, which essentially means that the more you can recall information, the more efficiently you can access that content in the future. Because again, that practice helps create those neural pathways for long-term retention. So you might think about it as when you're desperately trying to find your keys, right? If you always put them in the same place, you know to go to that spot every time. And then it's much easier and quicker to find them the next time instead of like digging through your pockets or looking around your house or, digging through drawers or whatever. It's kind of the same idea here, right? That's why we do things like quiz ourselves before a test or use flashcards. Those are examples of retrieval practice. So a few strategies. Again, formative quizzes that you can do in the moment with them can help them practice retrieving that information. Doing things like polling, playing some games with them, flashcards, which I already mentioned. They've been around forever, but with great reason, right? Because they're a great retrieval practice activity. There's even some software that you can use like Quizlet that can turn it into an activity that students can work on together. AI tools can help with this as well, can help you or your students create flashcards. Choral response is another really super easy and fast strategy where you ask a question to the class and you have them all give you an answer, have them give you an answer all at once. Asking them to write brief summaries kind of meets the same purpose here. Incorporating questions. Several of you mentioned this as well. You can make your lecture more dynamic and more learning effective by incorporating questions that promote critical thinking. This is a fundamentally important aspect of education. They help us organize content, draw attention to important concepts, and again, encourage retrieval practice. So these accomplish all different kinds of these pillars that we've been talking about throughout this lecture, right? So some things to consider. Ask both lower level or factual questions like, what's the name of this theory? Or easy response questions like, who's ever done XYZ before? Because those are easy to respond to, students can feel comfortable responding to them. But you also want to include some higher level questions that ask them to think more deeply about the content, right? How does this theory compare to the last theory? There's that kind of higher order cognition that's really important for their learning. You also want to make sure you're asking convergent and divergent questions. So that means convergent questions are questions that have a single right answer, which is commonly what we might see in a lecture because they're fast. But sometimes students might be reticent to answer those because there is only one right answer and it's easier to get it wrong. Divergent questions are answers that have more than one right answer. So maybe more like a discussion question that can promote more participation from a variety of students and engage more of your students in a deeper way. The tone we set in the classroom and the way we respond to student answers really plays an important role here as well. A primary reason students don't answer questions is a fear of disapproval by their professor or their peers. So we have to cultivate a supportive environment with them. We want to positively reinforce correct answers, make sure the entire class recognizes that accuracy, but it gets trickier when the question is incorrect. So we need to make sure all the students know which one is the right answer, but without shaming or humiliating the student who got it wrong. So I like to, a phrase that I really like around this is trying to find the kernel of rightness in a student's wrong answer. So if you can figure out something that they said that's kind of getting towards the right answer, maybe you can draw on that, you can highlight that, ask some additional questions, and that can help them feel good about their contribution, but still make sure that you're getting towards the right answer with students. And help other students build off on that. Okay, quiz time. Here's your quiz. Time for some retrieval practice. What are some things that I did during this lecture to make it more dynamic? Put your answers in the chat. Humor, absolutely. Thank you for thinking I'm funny. Breaks for active learning, absolutely. Pause, pace, prompts, volume changes, examples, comments in the chat, absolutely. Connecting with you as humans. Thank you, Amanda. Time for each item, yes, absolutely. Bad fonts, yeah, guilty. Always gonna do it. Music, yes, at the beginning, even though Zoom makes it really hard to play music. Thinking and adding notes, absolutely. And yes, this quiz itself, absolutely, Tom Selleck. I'll try to work him into more of my presentations, maybe. Yep, not reading off the slides, thank you. Saying that they're well designed, I really obsess over them. Examples that you're familiar with, yes, excellent, good job. Way to go, everyone. Thank you for paying attention. Hopefully, this was a dynamic lecture that kept you engaged. So I know we're at the end of our time, but I have one more question for you before we wrap it up. What is one important, well, just one important new idea that you're taking away from this session for your next lecture? Besides Tom Selleck. Yes, fonts, fonts, fonts. Thank you. Good. Convergent and divergent questions. Great. Yes. Cues for learners, fonts. Thank you. Hopefully I have created a whole new group of font geeks, and I celebrate that. Walk you to the back of the room. Yes. Warm-up quizzes. Great. Non-graded. Awesome. Reflection time. Great. Got the funds. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. One word change to Aptos. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. We are at the end of our time. I want to be sensitive to that. I want to give you all a reminder. Applications are now open for our Spring Teaching Institutes. CETO, GATE, and CLAW are for faculty. GSTEP is for grad students. You can find more information on our website. If I have a minute, I will try to put that in the chat here for you. But I will also stick around for any of you if you have other questions or things you want to talk about. Otherwise, we are done. Thank you for being here today. Go forth and give dynamic lectures. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Sam. Miwako, unfortunately, if all of the Institute's meeting times don't fit with your schedule, I know that makes it really tricky. We might I think we're going to be offering both CETO and GATE in the summer though, so that might make it easier for you if you want to apply at the end of spring for our summer cohorts. That could be a possibility maybe, so be on the lookout for that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course, of course.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right.